Welcome to the Inflection Podcast, where we explore the pivotal moments that have shaped us into who we are today. I am your host, Anabi, and I can't wait to dive into these moments with you. Let's get it.
Welcome to another episode of the Inflection Podcast. It's a pleasure to have you here with me today, Cameo. Thanks for hopping on.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. So you are a product leader extraordinaire, right? You've had progressive leadership roles in the product space. You're what I will call a product veteran. And one of the things that always intrigues me is that journey into product management and getting into it. For your background, from singer in a rock band to becoming a product leader, like what did that look like for you making that pivot in?
So, a lot of it was, I think, driven by a certain amount of desperation. Um, because I had committed so much of my life at that point to trying to make it big as a musician. At that point, I was in my mid 30s, didn't really have a degree to be able to lean on. And it was a kind of a unique moment in time that the .com thing had crashed and we were coming out of that and the internet was still pretty new, but it wasn't going anywhere. So I stepped into a project management role. And I actually think I was hired as just almost an all-around admin that I don't even know if I had a title, honestly. And so I joined a very small startup, which when people say what's the best way to get into product, I still will tell them startups are still the very best way to build like true experience because you don't have a choice when you're in a startup. So I joined a startup with 4 people and going from not really knowing a whole lot about computers. I grew up nerdy, but I hadn't used a whole lot of computers at that point, to being a technical product manager. Like I said, a lot of it just is you get pushed into situations, especially when you have to build something for somebody, you have to learn how the underlying technology works. I think it is really difficult to not learn technology works if you're trying to help somebody build something. And we did a lot of custom development in that startup because for a lot of early stage products, if you don't have a lot of customers, that's just a great way to earn money. And so that really got me really interested in product, is figuring out how to have the right conversations with people about what to build.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Did, did you see your experience up to that point? Being a lead singer in a rock band, like assume you have to write lyrics, you have to interface with venues, with your team, members of your band and stuff. Do you see parallels in there between that and project and now product management?
That's an interesting question. I can certainly see with the perspective of time how the skills that I gained as a performer and as a musician
Yeah.
benefit me every single day. There are very few things that are as emotionally vulnerable as creating art with somebody else and writing music with another person. And then add on to that, we toured for years and essentially lived in a motorhome for quite a few years, and a group of sometimes between 4 and 6 of us, depending on the time. And you really get good at getting along with other people, even when things are hard because you don't have a choice.
Yeah, I love it.
But I think the requirements of what it takes to create really well with somebody else are, I think, part of what makes a really good product manager. A key part of the skill is to create a safe environment for everybody that you're working with so that you can find the best ideas. And one of my favorite things to remind myself is a product manager's job is not to come up with the ideas, right? We're not the arbiters of coming up with, here's what we're going to build. We
Yeah.
should be conduits to help engineers, to help have the right conversations with customers, to guide this thing versus being the idea machine. And so that's probably been the skill that I've carried forward the most from being a performer for so long.
That's really cool. To lean in with that a little bit more, like I've heard music described in certain circles as, a perfect it's like the play between chaos and order, right? Music, if you think of artisticness, right, as this chaotic sphere, being able to channel it through music, it's almost like playing around with just enough chaos and just enough order to arrange the notes and the song. Like that's why it's an
Yeah.
emotional journey for you as a performer, and for those listening, you take them on a journey, highs and lows, and you're able to manage that really well. uh, I don't know if that's true, but I really love that analogy. Music as playing around with chaos and order, balanced just perfectly.
I've never heard that, but I do really like that as a description, especially with creating music. It
Yeah.
does feel destructive sometimes too.
Yeah,
If you're making it right.
absolutely. So do you see any, with that description for music, do you see that playing a part too in product? If I could make a leap, right? Sometimes you're making decisions based on barely their information, right? Sometimes it's chaotic, sometimes it's messy. By the end of the day, you're creating something useful from that chaos. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that jump. And beyond just product, I think even startups in general, there's certainly this feeling of bringing kind of some order to chaos. I think it's funny in the professional world, though, because I actually think an anti-pattern that happens for a lot of people is we want there to be more order than there probably should be. You think about how often we get these reminders that the best product management happens when we're failing fast, when we're super experimental, when we're really running lean and go fast, break things, a mentality. And that's not always true, but I think sometimes we have a tendency to want things to be more, we want to say, oh, look, I brought all this order out of this chaos, when maybe what's actually better would be to have a little bit more of that chaos.
Yeah,
Maybe.
got to leverage it more.
Yeah.
With your experience and growth in the space so far, what is something now you wish you knew when you started?
I wish I had known how to leverage design thinking a lot more. That was something that I didn't discover until I had been doing product for quite a few years. And I think one of the biggest challenges inside of product is getting people communicating with shared language. And I think it's really difficult for people to do it well. And we want to be able to just do it with words, and
Yeah.
words are not the most effective tool, especially when we're talking about complex things, interactions inside of software.
Yeah.
Being one of every action can have so many possible reactions. And it's just funny, and we carry all these preconceived notions and assumptions when we start talking about the complexity that's inside software, and
Yeah,
we think we're having great conversations, and we're really not.
absolutely. That's a really good one. I like that. In my experience, that's something too I resonate with. I came across design thinking some years ago and have been trying to leverage it a lot more. It's something I don't do nearly enough, but it's definitely a paradigm that I'd like to lean in with. So I build more products and work with teams to build products.
And, I've been using it pretty actively since about, I wanna say 2016, and I still find I'll hear people still tell me, "Hey, I don't want my engineers to sit in a room and draw pictures for half of the day. I want them coding." And it's what we're doing is we're making sure your engineers actually understand stuff in a way
Yeah,
that they're not going to if they're reading a spec on inside a Jira ticket, right? Like,
yeah,
but I am honestly surprised at how much resistance I still regularly see to leveraging design thinking, and sometimes even just like the act of actually thinking somewhat carefully
mhm,
about, are we going to build this and should we build this?
yeah. Absolutely. I think part of that resistance too, right? How do I put it? It's a lack of understanding, or let me even say misconception about what design thinking is.
Hmm.
I think sometimes engineers that push back, or leaders in general that push back on that, go, yeah, we're just painting pretty pictures and drawing circles and boxes and stuff. In your opinion, right? What, or with the teams you've led, how have you encouraged like a culture of learning? I know you're big on learning and getting better every day. So how do you infuse that into teams you work with? Because sometimes learning is like this nebulous, yeah, learn, whatever. I'm always learning. But how do you really bake that into the culture of teams?
So I think it comes down to kind of some key agile things, but that you have to do really well. And the first is a really good team charter. And I've seen a lot of teams like their scrum master will come in and make the charter for them or whatever and say, here's our working agreement. But it can't be that. You need everybody on the team to sit down and agree to how they're going to work together. And part of that, it should be defining how they're going to learn together and improve as a team. Retros are the easiest way to do that. Most people, because Agile's kind of gotten to this point where it happens a lot by rote, people do retros without actually getting benefit from retros a
Yeah.
lot. And so if as a team, you can define what does culture for this team look like when it comes to learning? How are we going to ensure that we talk about where people's skill gaps are, right? That's something
Yeah.
you almost never will hear people talk about. But if you are serious about a team improving, every single person on the team should be trying to address a skill gap and learn something from somebody else on the team. So the only way you can get to that point is to really be overt about, hey, as a team, we're going to embed both this agreement that we clearly articulate how we're going to function together, specifically where it comes to improvement. And then, gosh, you just got to really make sure that I don't think it necessarily has to happen every 2 weeks,
Yeah.
but the team needs to be having a regular conversation that says, are we performing optimally? And what do we think that even looks like? Right. And then what are we doing to be more optimal? And I think most teams can make drastic improvements in the way that they function as a team, the way they deliver software. There's just typically we get into bad habits as a company culture, bad habits as a team culture, and then we get complacent on them and we just say, okay. And everybody knows that it's a little dysfunctional and, or maybe even a lot dysfunctional. And then we just don't talk about it. And then we wonder why it never changes. So being purposeful is the key.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. And along those lines, to make it even more specific for product folks who are looking to grow in the space or get into product management, grow as a good product leader, what are some things you would share? Now, you've shared earlier on working at startups. If you can, if you have the opportunity, blow out an opportunity, go in and learn as much as you can. But what are some other practical things you would say to such a person who's trying to grow as a product person?
So definitely read the masters, which in my mind, read Marty Kagan's books. They're great. I always recommend Teresa Torres's opportunity continuous discovery habits. Her usage of opportunity trees is a nice tool. And I think part of it is learning a couple of different mechanisms that can help you drive the right kinds of conversations. And so I am a really big fan of the book User Story Maps. That for me really helped me crystallize how I wanted to be able to interact with stakeholders and help guide them through talking about requirements in a way that made a whole lot more sense to me. So I always, and that's Jeff Patton, I always recommend that to people. The other thing is if you got to product in an atypical path, as most people do, and you don't happen to be incredibly technical, you really do need to understand as much as possible about the tech. And I'm not really an advocate of, I think product managers need to be engineers at all. but you need to understand the conversations that you're sitting in at least enough to, because like it or not, we have this idea in our mind that the product manager is in charge of the what are we going to build? And engineering is in charge of the how is it going to be built? But like it or not, like those two things are super intertwined. And if a lot of the how decisions that engineering is going to make, they will absolutely impact how your customers engage with the product. And they could be decisions that impact speed or performance. They could be decisions that impact how easy it is for engineering to make changes to the code later on, or how secure it is. And these are what are typically called non-functional attributes. And they're considered a lot to be outside of the domain of product, but they shouldn't be, right? As a product manager, you need to understand how each one of these non-functional attributes are going to impact your product so that you can negotiate for the right choices with your engineering. And I think left to their own devices, most engineers will always try and make software that can be updated and changed somewhat easily. But if they don't, you can quickly, we call it technical debt, but you can quickly get to the point where even making marginal changes can be very difficult inside of your code base. And then you're like, how did this happen? Why did this happen? Whether it was an engineering choice or sometimes a business choice to ignore those kinds of things. If you don't understand them, then you're not able to be the best steward for the best choices for that product, right? Because you're essentially putting on blinders between yourself and a critical part of what determines your product. It's been a real pleasure talking to you. I appreciate you inviting me on, and it's been just a fun conversation.